right, good morning. I see lots of you on here. Excited to be here with you today again. My name is Katie Akins, and I'm with the Arizona Farm Bureau Ag in the Classroom program. And we are very excited to be bringing you April's edition of our virtual ag tour. This month, we are going to be traveling to Tonto Creek Hatchery to meet with Bryce of the Arizona Game and Fish Department to learn a little bit more about their hatcheries and all of the fish that we have swimming in our streams here in Arizona. Just as a reminder, as we go through today's tour, if you have any questions, please enter those questions into the chat box, and I will be sure to ask those as we move through the presentation. So again, questions in the chat box. If you need anything from me, go ahead and put it in the chat box as well. Otherwise, at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Bryce. I am going to let you know, because of his remote location, you're not going to be able to see his face, but you will hear him as he's presenting today. So I'm going to go and switch over to our PowerPoint, and Bryce will get started. Bryce, take it away.
All right, good morning. As Katie said, my name is Bryce Sisson. I'm the manager at Tonto Creek Fish Hatchery, which is operated by the Arizona Game and Fish Department. For those of you that don't know, Tonto Creek Fish Hatchery is located about 17 miles east of Payson, Arizona, right below the Mogollon Rim. The Arizona Game and Fish Department runs six fish hatcheries. Most of them are trout hatcheries. We've got it broken up into two sides of the state, and we can kind of start the presentation, and I'll give you all a brief overview of all of the state hatcheries. So where do the fish come from in Arizona? So if you're an angler or you fish and you've caught any trout in Arizona outside of a handful of streams or rivers, all of those trout come from a fish hatchery. Arizona is a pretty dry state. We've got to have a lot of running water for trout to be able to spawn. So there's not enough natural habitat to allow trout to spawn, especially to meet the demand for the growing number of anglers and fishermen in Arizona. Almost all of the trout in Arizona come from one of these fish hatcheries. Next. So this map is kind of a breakdown of where the hatcheries are located in the state of Arizona. So we've got the east side and the west side hatcheries. The west side hatcheries are located mostly in central Arizona in the Verde Valley area. There's Page Springs and Bubbling Ponds Hatchery, which are located in Cornville, Arizona, kind of right in the middle between Cottonwood and Sedona. And then there's Sterling Springs Hatchery, which is located at the very headwaters of Oak Creek Canyon, kind of between Sedona and Flagstaff. The east side hatcheries are a little bit east of Payson, and then there's one in Show Low. So we've got Tonto Creek Hatchery, which is where I'm at, and Canyon Creek Hatchery just outside of Payson, and the Silver Creek Hatchery outside of Show Low. Next. So we currently raise about 6 species of trout at these hatcheries. We raise Apache trout, tiger trout, brook trout, brown trout, rainbow trout, cutthroat trout, Gila trout, and I guess actually technically we raise some Arctic grayling as well, so that puts it up to 8 species. But of those species, only 2 species are native to Arizona. The Apache trout and the Gila trout are the only 2 trout that were historically found in Arizona. All of the other trout have been brought in from either the East Coast, the West Coast, or even Europe in the case of the brown trout. Next.
It's delivery day at the Tonto Creek Fish Hatchery.
Everybody wants to know where our brood stock is here. And when we explain to them that we don't actually have any brood stock, that we get all of our eggs FedExed overnight, we get a lot of funny looks. People can't imagine shipping fish eggs. There's the first tray of eggs. They arrived in very good shape. There was still ice left. They look good. The box hadn't been turned upside down. That's always a good start. This order should have been 203,000 from Ennis National Fish Hatchery in Montana. We're rehydrating the eggs right now. They'll sit in this water for 10 minutes just to get rehydrated, and then we will sample count the eggs so that we know how many eggs displace a certain volume of water so that we can enumerate the eggs.
After the sample count is taken, the eggs are disinfected against any pathogens they may have come in contact with. Next, they are transferred to the incubation room where they are first scooped into sifters.
Drain out as much water as we can, like so. Just try to get it to where it's not dripping very much. There's always a little bit of water on there you can't do much about. And then from here, they will go into the measuring cup, and we'll put the eggs into here until we get to 1,000 milliliters. This is where it gets time consuming when you have 350,000 eggs come in. That looks pretty good. Then now that we've got 1,000 milliliters in the measuring jar, then we pour them into the McDonald upwelling jar.
Once the eggs are evenly divided among the cylinders, circulation tubes are attached and the pressure is adjusted to give them just the right roll.
It's an eyeball thing. You don't want too much roll, but you want to have enough roll on the eggs so that there's not like dead spots that aren't circulating, because those eggs aren't getting any air or any oxygen in the water. So you can kill eggs by not having the right roll.
It takes about 10 days for the eggs to hatch. Then it's time to move them from the incubation tubes to the sack fry troughs.
After we pour them in here, most of the sack fry and the eggs are just sitting on top of the slotted screen. And it's almost kind of like you're panning for gold. You're just kind of sifting the sack fry through the screen, and they'll all fall through into the basket. After you get all the sack fry sifted through, you're left with just dead eggs and blanks in the basket here. And move that over to the next one, and then inside the basket here you've got all your sack fry.
The tiny trout will spend the next 2 weeks absorbing their yolk sac before they begin to swim to the surface looking for food.
We started feeding fish on Sunday, so 5 days ago. They started feeding pretty well, and they're pretty crowded in the baskets, so usually after about a week, once they start feeding pretty well, we go ahead and transfer them into the larger fiberglass tanks, give them a little bit more room, and at that point they really start growing quick.
They continue to grow in these indoor tanks for the next 5 to 6 months until it's time to move to the outdoor raceways.
Today we are moving our fingerlings outside to the outdoor raceways to complete the grow out process out there. We're going to move out 6 tanks, should be about 105,000 fish.
Once outside, the trout can grow almost 1 inch per month. Several more months pass and the young trout have grown so much they're getting crowded. So Bryce and his crew are splitting the raceway, meaning they move half the fish to another raceway to give them more room. Even though the temperature is freezing outside, the fish can't wait.
22! I don't know so much about the fish, but it's a little bit cold for us.
In 2015, Tonto Hatchery raised over 1 million trout, which is one reason this visitor keeps an eye on the process, hoping for an easy meal. Trout cannot reproduce in lakes or ponds because they require cold, clear-running perennial streams. So the vast majority of trout caught in Arizona's waters originate from one of the department's 6 hatcheries.
All right, we're done. This moves 1,687 pounds. That's 21,000 fish. And they're split them evenly between the two raceways, so we've got 10,500 in each one. And they'll be in the raceway for another 6 months or so until they reach 10 inches. And then we'll stock them into the streams and lakes around the rim country here.
Raising trout is a year-round job, so the next time you catch a shiny rainbow, take a moment to think about the dedicated hatchery folks whose hard work made it all possible.
Bryce, that was pretty cool. I cannot believe how many fish are raised there each year. And I didn't realize that they couldn't breed in our streams that we have here. So that was a pretty interesting fact. I do have a question, a couple of questions that have come through. And one of those is, what do the fish eat? What do you guys feed the fish?
So primarily the trout are fed a commercial trout diet. It's produced by a livestock and pet food manufacturer. It kind of looks like dog food almost. But the consistency of the feed is high protein. It's mostly fish meal and soy meal, and then some other grains and cereals. But yeah, it's usually about 45 to 50% protein.
Okay. And another question one of our classes asked is, do you keep the different species of fish, are they separated or do you have them all together?
So we separate all of the fish, not only by species, but by lot. So each time we get an egg shipment in, all of the eggs that are delivered are considered one lot of eggs. So in most circumstances, that entire lot of eggs will be kept separate from any other eggs or fish for the duration of their time at Tono Hatchery.
And then we saw the beautiful eagle in that video. And it mentioned that the birds hang around for a free meal. Do you guys lose a lot of fish to those birds, or do you have any systems in place to keep the birds from coming to get the fish?
So predation from birds and wildlife is a major problem at the hatchery. We have an electric fence that runs around every raceway. But that really only works to keep the raccoons out, and some of the blue herons. It'll keep those out as well because they have to land on the side of the raceway to be able to grab a fish. In the winter months, we have a pair of eagles that are here from November until maybe the beginning of April, and they tend to try and get any fish that may jump out of a raceway or our show pond and wetlands ponds. Those are kind of their hunting grounds, but yeah, they'll take a couple of fish a day on average. We kind of planned for those losses so that we can accommodate the eagles as well as maintain our production. The eagles actually just left here probably 2 weeks ago, maybe. And right now we've got a pair of ospreys that come in as soon as the eagles move out. So the ospreys actually, they're a little bit more agile to fire. They are able to fly underneath the canopies on the raceways and dive into the raceways and get fish out. We've yet to come up with a good plan to keep the ospreys out. So right now we just kind of have to anticipate that we're going to lose a handful of fish every day to the birds.
So that might be a good STEM project for our classes to work on is what is a good way to keep those osprey from diving in and getting those fish? I like it. Okay, so we have a second grade class in Lehigh that is asking, how often do you get a shipment of eggs?
So that depends, every year kind of depend with our management goals at the time. So at the time that that video was made, our Sterling Springs hatchery was shut down due to a wildfire that decimated the drainage, and there was a lot of concerns over flood risk and possibly washing away the hatchery. So for about that 3-year period that Sterling Springs hatchery was closed, we were getting eggs in about every 2 months. And each order was anywhere from probably 160,000 eggs up to about 350,000 eggs.
Wow, that's a lot of eggs. And I know it touched on it a little bit in the video about how you count them. Obviously, you don't count each individual egg. So can you explain the volume and water displacement again, very simply, for how you guys are able to count the eggs?
Sure. So the eggs, we'll start with a small graduated cylinder, and we'll put a known volume of water in it. In our case here, we'll typically put 5 milliliters of water into this small graduated cylinder. Then we will count out 50 eggs and place them in that graduated cylinder, and we'll measure how much the water has moved in the graduated cylinder. So typically 50 eggs will displace anywhere from about 2.5 to maybe 4 milliliters of water. And then we can do the math on that and figure that each egg, or 18 eggs or so, will displace 1 milliliter of water. And then when we go through and place all of the eggs into the upwelling jars, we'll kind of keep a total displacement number. And using that sample count that we got with the number of eggs per milliliter of water, that's how we get the total number of fish. We do that with everything, with the fish from the time they're egg until they leave the hatchery. So even, if you come up to the hatchery and you see a sign that says, there's 115,000 trout in a raceway, we didn't actually go through and count every trout. We'll put 20 pounds of water in a 5-gallon bucket and pour 10 pounds of fish in there and then count each fish so that we have a average number of fish per pound. And then we usually do a total weight, and that's how we know how many fish we have in the raceway.
So it sounds like there's a lot of math in your world.
Yes. So we do a lot of math and a lot of more basic and introductory algebra. So kind of a funny story. I've got a daughter that's 19 and one that's 14, and I help them with their math and algebra homework all the time. And they always say, "Oh, I'll never use this." And I have to give them, real life examples from what we do at the hatchery with a lot of those algebraic equations, so they can actually see firsthand, that I do use that, and I use it fairly often.
That real world experience, I love it. Okay, so what do we have going on this screen? What are all these numbers?
So this came from our State of the Hatcheries presentation that went to the Game and Fish Commission a few years back. And this was one fiscal year of production for our all 6 of our hatcheries. So the fiscal year runs from July 1st to June 30th. So in that 1 year, we stocked almost 1.4 million fish. There's 1.38 million trout for 300 and almost 75,000 pounds, and then 12,000 native fish for almost 12,000 pounds. We stock fish all over the state. So the combination of miles for all the trucks that we drive was over 132,000 miles. So like here at Tano Hatchery, our busy stocking season starts April 1st. Most days of the week in April and May, we've got all of our stocking trucks out driving, down to the Salt River or over the White Mountains, even Flagstaff and Williams. We put a lot of miles on the truck and go all over the state to provide better fishing for the fishermen in Arizona.
Can you describe to our students what those stocking trucks look like or how that works?
So the stocking trucks are a flatbed pickup truck that has a big aluminum or fiberglass tank on the back. So it's basically a flatbed truck with a aluminum or fiberglass square on the back that has a lid on the top and valves where we can remove water. And all the fish are inputted into the tanks through the lids on the top. These tanks have mechanical aeration inside the tanks. So it almost looks like a little prop that's behind the screen that circulates the water in the tanks and comes out of a spray bar so that it helps degas the water as well as spread oxygen through the water as well. And there's also a couple of air stones in each tank. We will add high pressure oxygen into the water so that the fish have enough oxygen for respiration.
Do you know what the farthest is that a fish would have to travel in one of those trucks?
So at Page Springs Hatchery, which is right outside of Cottonwood, they will stock all the way down to Nogales. And they will also stock Lee's Ferry, which is right below Lake Powell in Page. So some of those runs are a 6-hour trip one way.
Wow.
But we also occasionally go to other states and pick up fish. We're actually going to Colorado here in a couple of weeks to pick up some cutthroat trout fingerlings. So I think that one is going to be a 13-hour trip. Now,
I don't know how many of our kiddos listening in today are fishermen and women, but I definitely enjoy fishing. And of course, there's nothing more exciting than catching a really big one. And I hear that you have caught a very, very big fish in your lifetime. In fact, maybe you hold the record for one of our trout here in Arizona. Is that true?
That is true. When I was a senior in high school, I was 17 years old. I was fishing at Reservation Lake in the White Mountains, and I caught a 36-inch, 22.9-pound brown trout, which is still the largest trout ever caught in Arizona.
Wow. That is amazing. That is a giant fish. Was that
actually the one
fly fishing or?
No, I wasn't fly fishing that day. I was using a spinning rod and a Rapala jerk bait.
Wow. Do you still have that
earlier
fish?
When yes, I do. I have the skin mount in my house right now. Earlier when we were talking about the lack of pictures of that fish, one of the few pictures I have, my friend that was with me had his, I think, 6 or 9-month-old yellow lab puppy. And we've got me holding the fish and him holding the puppy, and the fish is bigger than the dog.
Oh my goodness, that is a big fish. Now, I know some of our students, they might be living in communities where they have a community fishing lake, man-made lake. How do those lakes get the fish? Is that from you guys? And how do you know that those have to be stocked? How does that work?
So some of those lakes are stocked from one of the 6 state hatcheries, but the majority of the fish that come from the community fishing program and in those community and urban ponds, we actually have those trucked in from Colorado. So with the limited water that we have in Arizona and the increasing number of anglers, we struggle to meet the demand to stock out enough fish to kind of meet that demand for the anglers. So we've had to reach out to other states and try to get fish from other places as well. But the process to decide when to stock and the number of fish to stock, that usually comes from one of our fisheries biologists, which are spread out throughout the state. And they have a number of techniques where they can use to determine the number of fish to stock and when to stock. One method is through creel surveys, which is where the biologists will actually go out and interview anglers while they're fishing and monitor their catch rates and angler satisfaction. And you can usually get a pretty good idea if you need to put more fish into a body of water based on the catch rates. Another technique that's pretty common is through sampling, which is either usually done through electrofishing or a gill net, where they'll actually go out and catch fish from a particular body of water just to get a gauge of the total population in that body of water. And if the number of fish caught per effort for electrofishing or gill netting is low, then they'll increase the stocking of that body of water.
That makes sense. We have a question that goes back to the transportation. When you guys are transporting the fish from the hatcheries to the bodies of water. And the question is, do you lose very many fish? I'm assuming that's not them jumping out, but do very many of the fish die in that transportation? You know, you said sometimes they're 6 hours, 13 hours. What is the loss during that?
Typically, the loss is extremely low. Actually, the majority of our stocking runs, if we have one mortality or we lose one fish, that's abnormal. So every once in a while, we'll have an issue with mechanical aeration and we'll lose more fish than that. But the usual or acceptable number for us is 0. So we rarely lose any fish during transportation. Occasionally, there are some dead fish that end up in the tank, but usually those come out of the raceway in that condition. So especially with smaller fish, we have to actually have somebody get in the water with the fish and walk around with them and catch them in a net. And smaller fish are pretty susceptible to being stepped on, unfortunately.
That is pretty good, an acceptable loss ratio of 0 when you are transporting over 1.3 million fish throughout the year. That is amazing. Okay, I don't see any more questions in at the moment. So, Bryce, can you tell us a little bit about your educational background, or what inspired you to do what you do, and what was the educational route you had to take to get the position that you have, and what exactly is that position called?
All right, so a little bit about my background. I grew up in Prescott, Arizona, and I was a fishing fanatic when I was a kid. In the summer months, I used to have my parents drop me off at a lake on their way to work, and then they would pick me up on their way home. So I spent just about every day out fishing. I've always loved fish, being outdoors. So I always knew that I kind of wanted to pursue a career in the outdoors, but I never really was aware of, you know, what the opportunities were. I'd been to all the hatcheries in the state, but you know, nobody had really ever told me what it took to get one of those positions. So actually, shortly after I caught my record trout, I went to a career fair at Yavapai College in Prescott, and the Arizona Game and Fish Department was set up there with a couple of their hatchery managers. And then right next to them was John Morgan, who is the dean at the agribusiness campus out in Chino Valley for Yavapai College, and they were just starting an aquaculture program. So, you know, I kind of talked to the game and fish people, and then talked to the Yavapai College folks, and just decided right there that this is what I was going to do. I didn't have to move anywhere. The program was right in my hometown, so I started at Yavapai College, and I got an associate's degree in agribusiness management with an emphasis in aquaculture. And for those of you that don't know, aquaculture is basically the production of fish. So that was a 2-year degree. And at the time, Arizona Game and Fish Department was hiring fish culturists with the minimum education level of that associate's degree in aquaculture. But I still wasn't entirely sure if I wanted to work at a fish hatchery forever. I may want to get into maybe law enforcement or wildlife biology or fisheries biology, something like that. So I elected to transfer to Northern Arizona University, and I have a bachelor's degree from NAU in biology with an emphasis in fish and wildlife management. And I'm glad that I did that, because shortly after I got on with the Game and Fish, they changed the minimum education requirements to where all of these hatchery positions now require a bachelor's degree in biology or a wildlife related field. So we have a lot of employees that have degrees in conservation or ecology, zoology, things like that. But we do require a bachelor's degree now.
Very cool. So definitely then there are some opportunities for those students who love fish. And I liked the word you used, and I'm hoping we can say it a couple more times before we're done today, but that was aquaculture, which is sort of the study and raising of fish. So that's a good term for our students to be familiar with. All right, well, I think we are getting close to winding up. So if we have any more questions, make sure you get them in that chat box here in just a couple of minutes so we can have Bryce answer them before he heads out for the day. I did include his email address here. Bryce might hate me for that, but if you have additional questions that you think of when we are finished up here today, you can always email myself at aitc@azfb.org or shoot those questions over to Bryce as well. Bryce, do you have any parting words? Any other fun facts that our students might be interested to know about the hatcheries?
Well, a couple fun facts about the hatchery. Most people are kind of surprised to learn that the majority of the trout that we raise here in Arizona are sterile. The majority of them are called triploid. And the reason that we raise triploid trout is, Arizona is a dry state. We don't have a lot of water, but we do have a fair number of native fish to Arizona. Now, unfortunately, with the minimal amount of water that's available in Arizona, the majority of these fish are now threatened or endangered. So we raise triploid trout so that when they are stocked out into the wild, they can't be spread by man or natural events or predators, and kind of start a new reproducing population somewhere where it may impact wild species of fish or native species of fish. So the rainbow trout are all triploid, our brook trout are all triploid, and then our tiger trout are a hybrid between a brook trout and a brown trout, which makes them sterile, so they don't reproduce either. We're looking into possibly trying to do some other triploid species of trout, but some of you may want to know what triploidy is. And triploidy is basically when it causes a fish to have 3 chromosomes instead of 2. And this is accomplished by pressurizing the eggs 33 minutes post-fertilization. So it's very, very time specific. There's also another way that you can temperature shock the eggs after fertilization that will block that phase of meiosis. But triploidy also has gotten very popular with the anglers and fishermen, because once the fish hit maturity, instead of putting any energy into reproducing, all of that energy goes into growing larger. So triploid fish will typically become larger than any other diploid fish. I think we've got 2 species of native trout. I kind of touched on that earlier. But the Apache trout is actually a great success story with the Endangered Species Act. So no sport fish has ever been an endangered species and gone all the way to being completely delisted off of the endangered species list. Well, the Apache trout has gone from endangered to threatened, and it is so close to being completely removed from the endangered species list. I think there was 19 or 20 bodies of water that have to have self-sustaining populations before the species can be completely delisted. And I think we're at like 16 or 17 bodies of water that are self-sustaining. So we're so close to getting that one delisted, which would be a huge success for Arizona Game and Fish, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, White Mountain Apache Tribe, as well as just angling groups and fish in general. It'd be an outstanding story. And the Apache trout, just they all come from Tonto Creek Hatchery here. If you catch one in the state side of Arizona, we get all of those eggs from Williams Creek Hatchery right outside of Pine Top, and we hatch them here. And we're the only state hatchery in Arizona that hatches Apache trout. So
Bryce,
I'd like to think
that is very cool. And we just had a question pop up about that. And the question is, how can they be self-sustaining if they're sterile?
So the Gila trout and the Apache trout, we don't make those triploid. Those are fish that we actually want to reproduce out in the wild. We don't have any issues really with the Apache trout or Gila trout trying to self-sustain and spread the population. What we don't want, especially with those two species of trout, are rainbow trout or cutthroat trout that are able to reproduce spreading into their bodies of water, because those two species of trout are able to hybridize with Apache trout. And that would be devastating to the Apache trout recovery if they were to hybridize with other species of trout.
That's fascinating. Okay, a couple more questions. I love this. So one great question here, again, from Lehigh Elementary is, are there regulations that are in place so that all fish hatcheries are the same, or the same requirements are posed on you?
As far as raising fish, everything is a little bit different at each hatchery, but there are different criteria that all hatcheries have to meet. One of the big ones in Arizona is our discharge permit for the water that comes out of the hatchery. So we work closely with the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality for our discharge permit. We do monthly water quality testing to make sure that we are not polluting the creek below the hatchery, and that's the same for all of our hatcheries. So we have a maximum number of nitrogen or phosphorus that we're allowed to put into the creek, and that impacts our ability to raise fish and how quickly we can grow them and the total number of fish that we raise.
And how many employees do you have there at your hatchery?
My hatchery, we're one of the smaller hatcheries in the state, so I have 2 full-time fish culturists or wildlife specialists, and then one maintenance employee. Compared to Page Springs Hatchery, which I think has 8 fish culturists and a maintenance employee. So they're well over twice the size of us, though. We're definitely one of the smaller hatcheries in the state.
Gotcha. Now I am gonna bring it back to that monster trout that you caught, that record trout. We have Oscar wants to know, how did you catch that big fish, and are there any tricks that they can use to catch the big ones versus the small ones?
So I was fishing in a little inflatable raft with a friend, and we were out after a rainstorm and the weather had cooled down. Hold on just a second. But yeah, the weather had cooled down. It was in the middle of summer months, and we try to be out there, at first light or last light. Fish are mostly active when the sun isn't directly overhead. And we were fishing shallow water where we knew that the trout were feeding. And I'd like to say it was all skill, but when I caught that fish at the time, that was by far the biggest fish I'd ever caught. That year, I proceeded to catch, I think, 5 other trout that were over 10 pounds out of that lake, and one that would have broken the record hadn't I just broke it a couple months prior. But you know, the big thing is understanding the fish that you're targeting and what kind of habitat they live in and what they eat. That will help you out more than anything. So I was using a trout imitating lure. It looked like a little rainbow trout. And actually, when I caught that fish, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife biologists that I talked to, they were estimating that big fish had switched primarily or entirely over to only eating other trout. So if you want to catch a big trout, that's the best way to do it, is to use a lure that looks like another trout.
Wow. I mean, it makes sense if he's that big, though. You don't want to waste their time on the little stuff.
Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Bryce, I sure appreciate your time here with us today. That looks like the last of our questions coming in from our students today. I sure appreciate your time and look forward to working with you in the future.
Yeah, it was a pleasure being here. I'd love to be back sometime. And you know, everybody has my email now, so if anybody has a question, feel free to send me an email. You know, I love talking about fish and you know, fishing. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to send an email my way.
Bryce, thank you so much. And to all of our students and classrooms who joined us today, thank you for joining us. And we will see you next month for the final tour of this school year. Enjoy the rest of your week.